Hello, members, and thanks for listening to this presentation on the proposed changes to our declarations and bylaws. I'm Neil Collins, President of the Pelican Sound Board of Directors, and I'm joined today by Vice President Mike Starr of our board and GM and Chief Operating Officer Eric Long. The document review panel was appointed by a board motion in March of 2024. Vice President Mike Starr is the chair of this group, and members included John Graft, Amy Rodemaker, Linda Christensen, and myself. And we had a lot of help from General Manager Eric Long and our attorney, Chris Pope. The panel's charge from the board was to review all Pelican Sound governing documents and to incorporate or more clearly reflect our current operations, best practices, and any changes to Florida law. We hadn't taken a comprehensive look at our documents in more than a dozen years, and the board wanted us to look at the bylaws, the declarations, and the rules and regulations at the same time to make sure they were carefully coordinated. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Starr, who's going to give you a little bit more explanation on the work of the panel.
Thank you, Neil. Our governing documents are the Declaration, the bylaws, and the rules and regulations. The Declaration is like our Constitution. It's legally binding. It outlines property-related restrictions, member obligations, voting rights, and the overall framework of governance. To change the Declaration requires a supermajority of 67% of the voting interest approving the revised Declaration. The bylaws define our internal governance structure, including topics like board composition, officer roles, and elections. The bylaws dictate how our club is managed and operated at an organizational level, and they can be changed by a majority vote of the board. The rules and regulations are the day-to-day policies that govern member behavior, club uses, and operations, and they too can be changed by majority vote of the board. Our goals were to consider how we can improve our operations and governance, review our committee structure and its relevance, simplify language and practice wherever we could, coordinate language and practices among the governing documents, and lastly, to remove developer references. The first three resulted in substantive changes, which I will discuss later. The last two, coordinate language and practices and remove developer references, we had a lot of corrections, grammatic corrections, spelling corrections, wording corrections, and we removed developer references. None of those changed the substance or intent of the documents, so we will not go over those changes. Beginning in March of 2024, we formed the document review panel. That panel had multiple meetings over the past year. In fact, when I say multiple, they had 18 meetings. They met through the summer up until just recently. On February 13th, we had the first reading of the documents at the board workshop. 2 weeks ago, we met with the MVRs on February 27th. We had a lengthy, productive meeting. The general consensus that came out of that meeting was that we needed that they approve an initiation fee. However, we did not settle on the amount of the initiation fee, and I'll cover that later. We met with Pelican Sound standing committees over a 10-day period. We met with all the standing committees except two, only because they didn't have a meeting during that time period. Then we had a second reading at the board workshop on March 13th. And lastly, we had a member meeting also on March 13th. This slide shows you what a markup of the documents looks like. I will tell you it's an interesting example because there are pages in both documents where there's more blue and red than there is black because of the number of changes that we made, particularly changes that I referred to earlier in wording and removing developer language. This document, the markup, will be available to you in a link in this GM report. This slide shows the improvement in processes and governance that are in the proposed documents. The first one, we moved the annual MVR meeting and election directors to December. Please note that the election will start in mid-November and the annual meeting will occur in early December. We made this change so that new directors come on the board at the same time as new committee members and new chairs come on the committees. Board vacancies will be filled by a majority vote of the board to serve the remainder of a term. Board vacancies occur for two reasons. One is that we have a situation where we have 3 openings on the board, but only 2 candidates. And in that event, the board will appoint a 3rd director by majority vote of the board. If a director resigns, again, the board will appoint a new director to replace that director by majority vote, and that new director will serve the remainder of the term. Finally, we revised the committee member replacement process so that no more than 2 new members are appointed to a committee in any one year. We did that because there have been instances where 3 or 4 or more vacancies occurred, and we lost on those committees where it occurred institutional memory. This, we hope, will prevent that from happening in the future. We are proposing 2 changes to the committee structure. The first is to change the mission statements of the Architectural Review Committee and the Strategic Planning Committee. The change for the ARC Committee is to emphasize their responsibility, make sure our standards are updated to sustain the value of our community. The change to the Strategic Planning Committee was to make it clear that our management drives the process just like they drive the budget process. We eliminated appeals and investigations based on the advice of our counsel, outside counsel, and we replaced those 2 committees with a much simpler process. Any matters that arise to the level that there could be a fine or a suspension first go to Eric for resolution. If it's not resolved by Eric, then it goes to the board, and the board renders a decision on whether or not to fine a member or suspend a member. And if the board does propose a fine or suspension, then the member has a right to a hearing panel. That hearing panel will be comprised of 5 members of the community who are not board members, but will be selected by the board. The hearing panel reviews the board's decision and either approves it or rejects it, but they cannot change it. The current bylaws have attachments, and we've moved those attachments, or these 3 attachments that you see on the slide, to the bylaws. The first was the current bylaws provide travel reimbursement if a board member has to return to Pelican Sound. We've changed that because today, due to video conference, travel is no longer necessary to come to a board meeting or to address a board matter. However, we've also provided that in rare and unusual circumstances, with the approval of the board, a board member could be reimbursed for travel expenses. The investment policy and borrowing policy were simplified, and the substance of those 2 policies was unchanged when they were moved to the bylaws. We are proposing 2 substantive changes to the declarations to improve our processes and governance. The first is the voting for board positions. That vote will be by the members through a club-administered poll. The second change is an initiation fee of $19,000 will be charged to new members effective July 1, 2025. We will address the initiation fee in more detail in the next few slides. I will now turn it over to Neil.
Before getting into the details of the proposed initiation fee, I think it's important to have a little bit of background. For the last 25 years, almost since Pelican Sound began, home purchasers here, whether new buyers or existing owners, have always contributed through a resale capital fee, which is 1 times the current annual assessment. All this money goes into the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund, solely used, according to our governing documents, for ongoing enhancements. This resale capital is one of our important capital sources, along with project-specific assessments, which we had in the past for the River Club and Fitness Facility, including bocce, for the Golf Club, the Racket Center, and many other amenities. It's important to note that we don't have a capital source from profits or retained earnings. We're set up as a not-for-profit corporation. That doesn't mean we can't make money, but our objective on long policy of the board is to run a zero-based budget. In other words, we try to break even each year and use our dues to subsidize operations at the club, from golf to tennis to food and beverage, keeping our prices reasonable for members. And here's how we've invested these capital resources in recent years. For the improvements to the River Club after Hurricane Ian, not the rebuild or the insurance part, but the enhancements to the club, $1,600,000. For the original River Club and Fitness and Bocce project in 2015, $3,900,000. For our Golf Club and Racket Center remodeling and rebuilding a few years back, over $10 million. And all told, we've raised over $9 million from resale capital through the end of February. That's a total of almost $25 million. And if you divide it up by our 1,299 doors, it's a per door calculation of over $19,000. So we're proposing that new buyers, people new to Pelican Sound, will pay an initiation fee of $19,000. This number better reflects the investments current members have already made. But there are other reasons as well. Here's a chart showing the new member fees and the yearly dues for area clubs, both bundled and private. We're showing both of these clubs because this is what new buyers are looking at. Prospective new buyers come to Florida. They perhaps don't understand bundled versus private. Instead, they're looking at a package of amenities. They're looking at the kind of housing that fits their lifestyle, and they're making a decision on where to live. Many of these clubs are in the $15,000 range. Copperleaf, for example, just raised their new member fee from $5,000 to this $15,000 level. Admittedly, at $19,000, we would be the highest new member fee in the group. But that's a status we've had over many years, just really until this past year. And it's been well justified by the outstanding, the really unparalleled package of amenities that Pelican Sound offers.
A new buyer is someone who has not previously owned another home in Pelican Sound. The initiation fee will be $19,000 effective July 1, 2025. That fee will be subject to future board changes after that date. New owners will not pay a resale capital fee. They will only pay the initiation fee. And just like the resale capital fee, the initiation fees will go to the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund. The resale capital fee is not changed from what we've done over the last several years. That resale capital fee is paid by the buyer at closing. It's equal to the annual assessment of the year of the purchase, and the fees go to the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund. There are 3 instances where transfers do not require an initiation fee or resale fee. Those are transfers to immediate family, a spouse, the children, domestic partners, parents, etc., for estate planning purposes. The second is adding or removing a spouse or domestic partner from the title with no payment. And the third is ownership transfers without payment, which do not change the beneficial ownership.
Thank you, Mr. Collins and Mr. Starr. Very informative information. Here's the next steps. So the board will vote next week on the declarations and bylaws. And then we'll have a member vote between March 19th through April 1st on the declarations. Most changes will go into effect immediately. Pending the vote, the new member initiation fee begins July 1st. And then the NVRs will ratify the vote of the declarations on April 3rd. And thank you again for watching the video, and we appreciate you taking the time to vote next week, and you all have a great week. Take care.